In the late 2010s, Cyberpunk 2077 wasn't just another video game. It was supposed to be a symbol of everything the medium could be. The freedom the player would experience, the style of the game, the technology that would push this game to your screens, everything down to the choices the player would make. It was all supposed to be revolutionary. It was a world that promised to let players live a science fiction fantasy that they had always dreamed of. It was coming from the developers at CD Projekt Red, a studio that had gone from a local Polish developer to a global legend after The Witcher 3 Wild Hunt's release. Their reputation was spotless, their ambition was unmatched, and when they said, "We'll release it when it's ready," people believed they would release it when it was ready. But when the time came, it just wasn't ready. Years of anticipation turned to frustration overnight. Bugs, crashes, broken promises, and an audience that felt betrayed. What was meant to be the future of gaming became one of its biggest cautionary tales. The studio that once could do no wrong was suddenly on the defensive, and the legend of Night City had now become something else entirely. This is the story of CD Projekt Red's Cyberpunk 2077, the rise, the fall, and the redemption of the game. Thank you all for clicking on this video, and I hope you enjoy. Without further ado, let's get into it. The idea of Cyberpunk 2077 began in 2012. CD Projekt Red wanted to adapt Mike Pondsmith's tabletop RPG, Cyberpunk 2020. The announcement trailer showed a chromed-armed woman frozen in time as police bullets shattered around her. Sleek, violent, and somewhat mysterious. It was barely a minute long, but it told players one thing: the studio's next world would be unlike anything they had ever seen before. At that moment, CD Projekt Red was riding high. The Witcher 2 had proven they could compete with the Western giants. Inside the Warsaw office, morale was sky high. Developers dreamed of building not a medieval world, but a futuristic city that pulsed with life. They began building out Red Engine 4, a complete overhaul of the tech used for The Witcher 3. It had to support first-person gameplay, a dense vertical environment, and AI-driven crowds. It was a technical mountain, and most of those tools just simply didn't exist yet inside of the Red Engine. A former developer had this to say about this time working at CD Projekt: "We were inventing new systems while still figuring out what the game even was. Some days it felt like we were building the airplane mid-flight." The early version was sprawling, branching storylines, lifelike NPC schedules, a city that never slept. But every innovation increased the complexity just that little bit more. As the design document grew, so did the gap between imagination and hardware reality. From 2016 to 2017, years had passed in near silence. But heading into 2018, more specifically June 2018, Cyberpunk 2077 returned with a 48-minute gameplay demo at E3. It looked breathtaking. Detailed interiors, cinematic dialogue, and a living city. The crowd erupted, many people calling it the future of open worlds. What no one outside of the studio knew was how tightly controlled that demo was. It ran on a specific build designed to specifically avoid the crashes they knew would happen on the actual version of the game. Features were hand-scripted to look seamless. It wasn't fake per se, but it wasn't reality either. The developers behind the game knew the game just simply wasn't ready to be shown off. The higher-ups, however, were promoting the game as if it was coming out in just a few years, which the developers felt was just simply unrealistic. From that point on, the hype just became unstoppable. No one knew that the demo was fake, so from their point of view, this game was unbelievable. And heading into E3 2019, CD Projekt Red was going to just continue to influence them that this was an unstoppable hype train that they had to be on. I'll let E3 2019 speak for itself.
Wake the f up, samurai. We have a city to burn.
Please welcome Keanu Reeves.
It was breathtaking. Johnny Silverhand, aka Keanu Reeves at E3 2019 was groundbreaking. No studio had ever built this much hype around their game. Well, no one in recent memory. Pre-orders had surged, every trailer was trending, and expectations had hit a level that no studio could comfortably meet. Inside CD Projekt Red, the mood had completely shifted. The team had grown to more than 1,000 people spread across multiple offices. Communication was strained, builds were broken daily, and it was just an overall mess. So when the original release date was given at E3 2019, the staff thought it was some sort of sick joke. They thought there was absolutely no way they would hit that release date. And they were right. Delays had immediately begun. First in April 2020, then September 2020, then November, and finally December 10th was the final sticking point. Each delay eroded trust externally and added stress internally. Then heading into 2020, the pandemic hit. Remote work had completely disrupted the QA testing of the game. It had completely halted the console optimization for the game because they couldn't access the dev kits because they had to stay at the office due to security reasons, and that overall made collaboration even harder between the different offices. All of this led to developers favoriting the PC build of the game because they could directly access those dev kits. It was right on their computer. But for the console dev kits, they had to go into the office, and really nobody was doing that at any point. So this was causing the last gen and current gen versions of the consoles to fall really far behind. And the last gen consoles were already falling pretty far behind. From the beginning of Cyberpunk 2077, it was always the plan to release it on last gen consoles and PC, then port them to next-gen consoles to get an essential double dip. A lot of publishers and developers did it around this time, but not all of them had the density and the scale of a city like Night City. So when you're pursuing something like Night City, the last-gen consoles just weren't keeping up. Developers had warned consistently throughout the entire developmental period that the last-gen consoles just simply couldn't handle Night City. But because, well, CD Projekt Red had sold their investors on the vision of getting that double dip from players, there was absolutely no room to scrap the last-gen consoles. And on top of that, when developers kept warning that this game was definitely not going to be ready for December 10th, CD Projekt Red demanded that there was no room for delays. The leadership needed them to get across the finish line by that December 10th release date. The company's reputation and their financial year, more importantly, absolutely depended on it. So, features were getting scrapped, things were being rushed, and the story was being slapped together. More importantly, a lot of things that were being cut had to do with the story. Branching dialogue, that was gone. Cutscenes, gone. Anything remotely related to an RPG that was too complicated, gone. Character customization, significantly scaled back. Car customization, gone. Parts of the map, gone. Everything was on the chopping block. They had to get it out, and the game just wasn't going to be ready by that time. Which is unfortunate, because it could have been ready in just a few years. If you just delayed the game, gave the developers more time, this could have been one of the best games at launch. But instead, that hype train was already rolling, and they didn't dare delay it another time. So, they didn't. And the crunch pursued. Developers were forced to work long hours with short breaks to get the game out the door. So when Cyberpunk 2077 released worldwide on December 10th of 2020, 8 million pre-orders made it one of the most successful launches ever on paper. But that celebration didn't last very long. On PC, it was playable, but buggy. Still breathtaking though. On PlayStation 4 and Xbox One, it was barely functional. Players documented bugs by the thousands, T-posing characters, broken quests, crashes every few minutes. It was brutal. Within days, refund requests had flooded in. Review scores plummeted. On December 17th, Sony had completely taken an unprecedented step of removing the game entirely from the PlayStation Store. The first time ever a major AAA release had been delisted for a technical failure. Investors then sued. Stock values dropped nearly 40%. CD Projekt's image, once the most trusted studio in gaming, was in pieces in just a few days. Inside of CD Projekt Red, employees were frustrated. Why weren't the warnings from QA taken seriously? Why ship something that so clearly wasn't finished? The answers were actually pretty difficult to hear. Pressure, deadlines, overconfidence were all listed, but most of all, they had a belief. Leadership believed that post-launch patches could fix what they couldn't pre-launch. Which, of course, is the way it is going in the industry. Launch a game broken, and then fix it over the course of a few months to make it the game that it should have been at launch. You essentially get your money before you fix the game. It's an unfortunate strategy that still happens to this day on a pretty concerning basis. The weeks following the launch were a blur. Apologies, refund policies, and investor calls were everywhere. Then, a decision. CD Projekt Red would fix the game, no matter how long it took them. They published a detailed roadmap promising stability updates, performance patches, and a free DLC once the technical work was done. Patch 1.1 focused on preventing quest blockers, while 1.2, released in March 2021, addressed over 500 issues. Most importantly, rebalancing the driving physics and reworking the police response systems. It was essentially rebuilding the airplane mid-air. Again, because they already tried this previously. Throughout 2021, CD Projekt restructured. Leadership shifted to smaller, more focused teams. Internal QA was expanded. The company brought in new producers and project managers from outside of Poland, and they admitted publicly that communication and management had failed the project and promised that they would learn from their mistakes. As patches continued to improve the game, players slowly but surely began returning to Cyberpunk 2077. By summer 2021, Cyberpunk 2077 was stable on almost all next-gen platforms. By this point in 2021, it was obvious that CD Projekt was throwing last-gen consoles into the garbage. It was never going to be realistic to expect these very, very old pieces of technology to be able to handle what CD Projekt was asking them to do. So they abandoned them and decided to try and focus on the next-gen version, as that's where majority of the players were going to play it anyway. Also in 2021, Sony decided to restore Cyberpunk 2077 to its online store. A small but a symbolic victory that CD Projekt desperately needed. The studio publicly also adopted a more humble tone. Gone were the cinematic promises and massive campaigns. In their place, quiet updates, smaller live streams, and a simple message: we're still working on it. They were committed to making this game the best it could be, and they weren't live streaming that across the world, and they weren't demanding that. They weren't taking out ads to promote the fact that they were doing it. They were just doing it. They knew they had messed up, and this was their way of rebuilding that trust that had been lost. Some developers were speaking openly about burnout and their recovery process. Some developers had left the company, others were staying. A lot of the ones that chose to stay were motivated by the fact that they didn't get to finish Cyberpunk 2077. But if they stayed, they got a chance to rebuild that game and shape it into the vision that they had seen from the beginning. All through 2021 and 2022, updates pushed to Cyberpunk continued to push it even further. Bugs were being fixed, issues were being patched out, and as a whole, the game was starting to come around. And heading into September 2022, the tide really started to turn. Netflix released Cyberpunk Edgerunners, an anime by Studio Trigger. Set in the same universe as Cyberpunk, it told a self-contained story about love, loss, and survival inside of Night City. The show became an instant hit. Critics praised its heart and style. Fans who'd never played the game fell in love with the world and rushed to experience it firsthand. Within weeks, Cyberpunk 2077's concurrent player count skyrocketed from under 20,000 to over 1 million. Steam reviews had completely flipped from mixed to very positive. positive. Patch 1.6 launched alongside the anime, added a ton of quality of life features, cross progression, and tributes to the show. For many, this was the moment that Cyberpunk 2077 truly was reborn. Despite this, heading into 2023, CD Projekt was determined to continue to expand on the game. And heading into September 2023, CD Projekt was getting ready to release Phantom Liberty, the game's first and unfortunately only major expansion. Set in Dogtown, a militarized district of Night City, it introduced new characters, espionage missions, and a complete overhaul of core systems. Unlike the original release, Phantom Liberty arrived polished, tested, and stable. Critics called it a triumphant redemption arc. The 2.0 update that accompanied the expansion reworked combat AI, it redesigned the perk system, and introduced a functioning police pursuit system. Every major complaint from 2020 had been addressed for the most part. Players who once demanded refunds now posted praise. Night City finally felt complete. CD Projekt still wasn't done. They then, after all of this, added a metro system. They added car customization, although pretty bare bones, it was there. They added different apartments you could purchase and own them, and you could invite your lover in the game to your apartment, although not very in-depth, it was there. They added so much to this game after launch that it truly was unrecognizable to the original release. In post-launch interviews for Phantom Liberty, CD Projekt leadership acknowledged their mistakes. They spoke about misjudging the technical limitations of last-gen consoles, underestimating QA feedback, and letting hype dictate timelines. In a joint statement from CD Projekt leadership, two people, I don't know how to say their names, Adam Kaczynski and Marcin Iwinski, I tried my best, we learned the hard way that ambition needs time and transparency. We won't forget that. The company restructured into a global organization. They opened a new North American studio in Boston to lead Project Orion, the Cyberpunk 2077 sequel, and transitioned from Red Engine to UE5. Although a promising engine, a lot of complaints have been had about the engine in recent memory, so we'll see how CD Projekt handles the limitations of Unreal Engine in the near future. The lessons of Cyberpunk 2077 became a part of the company's DNA. A lead designer at CD Projekt had this to say about this time. We learned humility. We can't chase perfection through pressure. We get there through patience. Today, Cyberpunk 2077 is a very different story from the one told in 2020. Its launch remains one of gaming's biggest failures, but its recovery, one of its greatest turnarounds. The game now stands as a case study in ambition and accountability. It reminds developers that transparency is what matters, and that crunch has its limits, and that trust, once broken, can still be rebuilt, if a studio is willing to earn it back one patch at a time. For players, the journey of Cyberpunk 2077 mirrors the world it depicts. Flawed, chaotic, but driven by the hope of reinvention. Night City was built on broken promises and humiliation, resilience, and so was Cyberpunk 2077. It began as a dream too big to realize. It collapsed under its own weight and rose again through the determination of the people who refused to abandon it. The future it imagined, it was messy, loud, imperfect, ended up reflecting its own story. Because in the end, Cyberpunk 2077 wasn't just a game about technology, it was about people, and the belief that even in a world of broken code and shattered trust, redemption is still possible. Thank you all for watching. Hi, so I was editing this video and I just wanted to, jump in here real quick and say, if you've noticed that the editing for this video became, let's say, a little bit rushed halfway through, that's because it was. I've been working on my own video game-ish thing on the side, and I just haven't had the time on top of everything else to work on this video fully and properly. I hope that doesn't make this video a really bad video. I still think it's a good one. I think the script was well written, and I still think it was a very good video despite the bit of a rush nature that I had put on it. Hopefully I can have more time to work on these kinds of things later down the line. So sorry about that. I hope you still enjoyed, and thank you for watching.